When Harvard Computing Group was designing TaskMap, we had two primary goals in mind. We wanted to make it easy to create content-rich process maps, not just flowcharts with text on boxes, but content-rich maps. And second, we wanted to make it easy to read those maps, because the average business person doesn't spend a lot of time looking at process maps of any sort, so they need to be able to get value from the map very quickly. To achieve those goals, we did two primary things. One was to limit the number of shapes that appear in the stencil, so you'll see there are only 6 shapes in the TaskMap stencil. In particular, the start shape and the end shape mark the beginning and the end of a process. They don't have any data attributes or any particular intelligence built into the shapes. They truly just mark the beginning and the end. In contrast, the task shape has data attributes, as does the task link arrow, and they both have a fair amount of intelligence built in so they know when and where and how they should be connected. The two remaining shapes in the stencil, the connector and the label, don't appear in this particular map because it happens to be a one-page map sample, and the purpose of the connector is to guide the reader from page to page in a multi-page map. You'll see more about the connector and the label in subsequent videos. Let's zoom in and take a look at a specific task shape to understand the second thing we tried to do, besides keeping the symbol set small, to make maps easy to create and easy to read, and that is to have a standard format for the data values that appear on a task shape. Regardless who creates the map, every task map will essentially look the same. So if you've seen one, you'll be very familiar by the time you see a second or third one. I should mention that I currently have this map open in TaskMap Standard, which is why some of the buttons on the TaskMap tab that appears on the Visio ribbon are grayed out. We'll look at a TaskMap Professional example a little bit later. Also, when I select a task like A02, there's a set of data fields that appear. This is the TaskMap Standard set of fields. You'll see an expanded list of data fields when we work with TaskMap Professional. So what is the appearance of the data and data fields associated with a task? Well, the first thing you notice is a description right in the center of the task shape. That's a concise description, and we strongly recommend that you be concise and that you start each task description with an action-oriented verb. So you'll notice determine, select, populate, customize. Give the reader an immediate sense of the action associated with each task. Above the task shape is a role name, and most people will look at that and figure out, because it's top center, that must be who's in charge, and indeed that is the responsible role for each task. In the lower left-hand corner are two optional timing attributes. In this case, RE is an abbreviation for recurring. It's sort of a generic frequency. We know, we're saying that we know this task is going to happen again, we just don't know exactly how often. 45M, 45 minutes, that's the expected completion time for this task. Below the task, there are 3 additional types of information that appear, each of which has its own specific symbol. The piece of paper looking icon represents the category we refer to as guidelines. Sales manual in this case is a document that the administrator can go to look for more information about this task. And that's the general purpose of guidelines. They tend to be documents, PDF, Word, Excel, and so forth, although you can type specific instructions in a guideline field as well. Next is the wrench icon. The wrench represents the tools, supplies, materials. They could be IT systems, forms somebody fills out, whatever the case might be. These are the tools, the things that you use to actually do the work of the task. So guidelines help me understand more about this task. Resources are the things I use to do the work of the task. And then there's a person icon that represents people acting in a supporting role. That's a key thing that's missing from many types of process maps. It's all well and good to understand the responsible role, but it's very useful to be able to indicate to whom that person would go if they need help, or who else is involved in this task, because many tasks are performed by more than one role. The descriptions on the task link arrows either describe what has just happened or what needs to happen next. In effect, what you're indicating is what's going on in between these two tasks, or the state of affairs between a pair of tasks. Before we leave this page, I'd like to talk a little bit about decisions. Those of you who have worked with flowcharts in the past may have noticed that there is no decision diamond, the traditional way to represent decisions in flowcharts, located in the TaskMap stencil. And that's because we thought long and hard about making decisions and how they should be represented. Ultimately, we decided to use the same task shape that's used for every other action in a process for two reasons, really. One is because we were trying to keep the symbol set small, and not having a diamond kept the shape set to 6. But even more importantly, we believe that making a decision is really just another task in the process. It has the same data attributes, the same guidelines, resources, time constraints, all those things that apply to almost any task also apply to a decision. So for example, here is a task that represents a decision. A sales manager is approving or rejecting the pricing proposed by a sales rep in the previous task. This decision has a primary outcome, that's the thick black line, and TaskMap draws all task links as thin black lines. So if I drag a new one on here, you'll see that's how it appears. But you can simply right-click or go to the Home tab and change the thickness. We often recommend making the primary path through the process a more bold line, and that way the reader's eye just falls on the expected path quite naturally. This red line marked pricing rejected is in fact the negative outcome, and we just use the same idea. Red is commonly associated with negative, so why not use that to indicate rejected? You can make a task link any color you want, but don't go overboard. Too many colors can confuse the reader. Pricing rejected in this case leads back to the sales rep to do the pricing again. There's also a third outcome in this particular case, and that's labeled additional information required. This is something that's important to represent, but often unintentionally left out of many process maps. What does the person responsible for this task do if they can't make the decision? Well, we need to provide a path. In this case, the path just leads back to the previous task, but it could go somewhere else in the process if there are other steps we need to do in order to provide enough information for the responsible party to make the decision. If you'd like more tips and ideas about formatting task maps or making certain paths more obvious than others, we offer a TaskMap style guide that's on our website at taskmap.com on the support page. Let's take a look now at starting with a blank page and creating a new task map. This map is opened with TaskMap Professional, which is why the TaskMap tab has additional buttons that are lit up and available. Regardless of TaskMap Standard or Professional, just begin by dragging a start shape onto the page. You can drag a task shape and use Visio's dashed lines and arrow feedback to position this exactly where you'd like it. The very first task you put onto any page causes the task ID suggestion dialog to appear. TaskMap, in this case, suggests A and 1. Now, why does it make those specific suggestions? The page ID is derived from the page name tab. So if you look down at the bottom, you'll see that the standard TaskMap template provides two pages, one marked A and one marked B. Specifically, for the suggestion, TaskMap looks at the beginning of the page name, and if it finds 1 through 4 characters followed by a space, it assumes that's what you intend as the page ID, and so it places that in the page ID portion of the suggestion dialog. The number starts with 1 because this is the first task on the page, and if I click that, that's exactly what I get, A01. To add additional tasks to the page, you can of course drag them from the stencil. Same with task link arrows. I can glue this on here. You notice the task has 5 connection points on the left and right to make it easy to show multiple paths when you want to. Or you can also take advantage of a very cool feature in Visio called Auto Connect, and that's represented by the blue triangles that appear when you hover over a shape in a task map. I'm going to use that and the Quick Shapes menu to very quickly add subsequent tasks to this page. And if I'm ready to add a connector, I can do that too. So let's just fire a connector onto the page, and you notice that a label appears automatically. More about those in a moment. Let's add some data. I'm going to create a simple human resources recruiting process. What causes that process to start? Probably a hiring manager who comes to HR and says, I need a person. So what's a good description on this task link? What just happened? a staffing need was reported. The first task is going to be someone in the HR department, probably a recruiter, who's going to log this job request into a database. So let's enter a description that says log job request. And as soon as I tab out of that field or click on the page, that description appears in the center of the task shape. I'll skip the decision task field. That's a TaskMap professional only field. Guidelines, as the pop-up text suggests, are documents or things that help me understand more about this task. So what documents might exist here? Well, probably an HR policy manual of some sort. And you can include up to 5 guidelines with a semicolon as the separator. So perhaps there's a recruiting standard operating procedure document that applies as well. When I click out of that field, you notice that both of those appear each with its own icon because I entered 2 values separated by a semicolon. Resources, those are the tools, supplies, materials. Remember, there's probably an HR database of some kind into which we're entering this job request. Next, let's select role names. We provide a default list. It's not the right list for you or anybody else, but it's a starting point and gives you some ideas about what you might use on your list of role names. What I would really like is a role name of recruiter for this first task, but that doesn't exist. We don't let you type in new role names ad hoc in this box. We want you to customize the list, and so let's do that. Let's go to the TaskMap tab and the Customize Role Names button. In this dialog is where you will add, edit, and delete role names. So for example, I can type new and enter recruiter. And let's do that again. Perhaps I want to include an HR manager for use in this map as well. If you want to edit a role name, you can do that quite easily. If I choose clerk and change it to chief clerk, then that role name change will apply to all tasks in all pages in this map. It doesn't apply to other maps, but that's why the import and export buttons exist. But making changes does make the change across all tasks. So if that role name had been in use, all tasks would be updated immediately. Similarly, I can delete a role name. If I choose CIO and choose delete, I get a warning that says, "Are you sure?" And I can say yes or no at that point. Let's close, go back to responsible role, and now I can choose recruiter. And for supporting role 1, let's choose the HR manager role that I added a moment ago. Quick note, don't use people's names. Always use role names when you're creating a process map. People tend to come and go, but role names tend to persist over a longer period of time. Frequency of occurrence is a drop-down list. I mentioned the purpose was just to describe how often this task occurs. We do provide a couple of generic frequencies at the top, like recurring that we saw in the previous example, and then the standard sort of things you'd expect, hourly, daily, all the way up to biennial. I should also mention this list is customizable, so if you select the TaskMap Options button on the TaskMap tab, you can specify additional frequencies if you'd like. I'm going to choose daily on the assumption that this is something that happens once a day. We log the job requests that have occurred in the last 24 hours. Time units I can indicate in any of 5 available time units: seconds, minutes, hours, days, and weeks. Let's leave this as the default of minutes and indicate that it takes, say, 10 minutes to enter this job request. So now we've got a task that's looking pretty good, fairly fully specified. We can add additional information if we want to, like notes. If I enter a note here, verify open requisitions, so we make sure that this hiring manager does indeed have spaces to fill. When I enter this note text, you'll notice that the task is embellished with a little red triangle, and hovering over it displays the contents of the notes field. So it's a way to just add a little bit of extra information, not content that needs to be displayed all the time, but that is available to the reader if needed. That should be enough to get you started. In subsequent videos, you'll learn about the connector and label for moving the reader from page to page. You'll learn about the incredible value you can add to your task map by adding hyperlinks to external resources. We'll also walk through the buttons on the TaskMap tab so you get a better understanding of all the different functions that are available within the TaskMap system.